This reading is from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister, theologian, and former president of Star King School for the Ministry. It's entitled, We Inherit Covenant Before We Create Covenant. To begin, a story. 8 years ago, I moved to California to become president of Star King School for the Ministry. Truth be told, I was feeling proud of myself, captain of my ship and master of my soul. I had valiantly charted my course to become first a cellist, then a minister, and now an educator. When I got to California, I discovered I had a passel of distant cousins I had never met. One of them, my cousin Eldon Ernst, was dean of the American Baptist Seminary at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He proposed an Ernst family reunion, and so we got together. When we arrived at the driveway of cousin Sally Ernst's home, I got the first introduction to my distant cousins by reading the bumper stickers of their cars. One said, "If you want peace, work for justice." Another, "Teachers do it with class." Another, "Live music is best." And then there was one that said, "If you love Jesus, tithe." Hey. Inside, over Jell-O salad, homemade rolls, and tuna casserole, reminiscent of every church potluck I had ever attended, we said hello to one another. Here was Sally, a minister of religious education and graduate of Pacific School of Religion. And here was Mike, a professional French horn player and high school music teacher, and Eldon, a seminary dean, and David, a United Methodist parish minister. Every single one of my distant cousins was a musician or a minister or a teacher, and several were all three. Not only that, the ministers were all liberal, social activist types with an intellectual bent. And all the musicians were classical. Apparently, I had never made any choices at all. My life was given to me. I did not make myself. And this is how it is. We receive who we are before we choose who we will become. As human beings, our lives begin and never leave the soil of this earth that shapes us through blood, kinship, genes, culture, associations, social systems, networks of relationships, and extended communities. Even when we do not directly know the people whose lives are linked with ours, our lives unfold in relationship to theirs. And this is how it is with covenant as well. We are born into relationship before we shape relationships by our conscious intention. We inherit covenant before we create covenant. We do not make ourselves. We are given the gift of life, the gift of the earth that sustains life, and the gift of one another, here, now, and in all the generations leading up to now. As the Brian Wren hymn sings it, we are not our own. Earth forms us. Human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. Covenant making must begin with the question, what have we been given? What is the covenant we are already in?
Thank you, Eli. And thank you all for having me this morning. It is so good to be here. March 2020, that was the last time I was at in-person worship. And I was also in the pulpit at that point. So it feels like a kind of a pandemic full circle thing going on. But it is so good to be here. Yeah, like I said, like Eli said, I'm a native Texan, so naturally I grew up coming to Corpus Christi because that was the closest beach. And it familiar territory for me. And when I was talking to my supervisor, Natalie, in trying to determine, what is our first congregational visit going to be when we can actually travel again. And we agreed Corpus was where we wanted to come. And we did, so UUA staff were for the most part still holding off on official travel. So we did have to secure special permission to come here, and I'm so glad we were able to. Yes, thank you. So again, my name is Cameron Young. I serve the Unitarian Universalist Association, our Unitarian Universalist Association, and we are made up of regions. So we're 5 separate regions, and I come to you on behalf of the southern region, which is from Texas to Florida, all the way down to Mexico and Puerto Rico. So that is our wing of the UUA, and we serve all the congregations within that region. We're part of a department called Congregational Life, and our job is to serve you, to be in relationship with you. We have what we call the 4 C's. We coach, so anything you might need help with, need resources for, we're here for you. We companion, because many of our congregations go through difficult times inevitably, and we remind you that you don't have to do it alone. We connect you with other congregations. We have hundreds of them, believe it or not, around. We have thousands of them, really, around the world. And then we challenge. We challenge our congregations and our UUs to be the best version of themselves that our theology calls us to. So I am going to sing a little bit of a song here. And if you know this, I think millennials will definitely know this, and perhaps their parents too. Feel free to sing along. The more we get together, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. All right. Yes. Yes, amen. Yes. Thank you. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Such simple yet such prophetic words from the timeless children's troubadour, Rafi Kavukian. I was part of the quintessential Rafi generation, also known as Beluga grads. Most folks about my age, and probably most people who raised kids about my age, will recognize that hit, as you did. Among others, such as Baby Beluga, Down by the Bay. The Armenian, Egyptian, Canadian singer remains an icon in the world of children's entertainment. But what is perhaps somewhat less known about him is his decades of philanthropy and work in advocacy. At one point, an ambassador to the UN, and extremely vocal in issues such as climate change, racism, wealth inequality. His most concerted advocacy has remained in the area of what is known as child honoring. His foundation is called the Rafi Foundation for Child Honoring. And get this, instead of a mission statement, the organization is characterized by a covenant and 9 principles. Where have we heard this before? To paraphrase the covenant, we find these joys to be self-evident that all children are created whole, endowed with innate intelligence, with dignity and wonder, worthy of respect. We affirm our duty to nourish and nurture the young, to honor their caring ideals as the heart of being human. We commit ourselves to peaceful ways and vow to keep from harm or neglect these, our most vulnerable citizens. The 9 principles: respectful love, diversity, caring community, conscious parenting, emotional intelligence, nonviolence, safe environments, sustainability, and ethical commerce. Raffi is not a Unitarian Universalist to my knowledge, but it's certainly curious that these documents seem to be layered in UU theology. After all, as a non-creedal faith, our principles, and especially our covenants, are what bind us theologically. We are at our very center a covenantal faith. Unitarian Universalists come together not by shared doctrine, not by we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, so on and so forth, but by the shared covenantal commitments we make to one another. What is clearly evident about this covenant for child honoring is that it's made not necessarily for the benefit of those who authored it, but those who are much younger and even the not yet born. What kind of faith might we be if we were to universally treat our covenants the same way? As Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker pointed out in today's reading, we inherit covenant before we create covenant. As the story goes in the Hebrew Bible, a covenant, a whole populace of unvaccinated individuals embedded in our communities. And yes, most scientific evidence would suggest that children are quite low risk when it comes to COVID, but certainly not no risk. What's perhaps more bothersome is that their needs are often omitted from these dialogues, and really the public sphere in general. We don't always take their needs into account. I recently met with leadership from a congregation in a galaxy far, far away, who was part of an aging community and had resigned themselves to the fact that that would be the dominant demographic. Well, perhaps this was true. They couldn't be bothered with a conversation on how to be more inclusive to young families. Since they couldn't seem to get them in the first place, they didn't seem to think it was important, missing the point that the conversation was not one about marketing to young people, but rather one about living our values. Raffi, in a TED Talk, says, "A unifying principle for societal change is that if you make the world work for the infant, it works all the way on up. The reverse isn't true. The same can be said of our churches and of our covenants. We must covenant for the interconnected web. We must covenant for our children. To covenant with love and hospitality that knows no bounds. The interdependent web, along with the rest of our 7 principles and 6 sources, are part of the covenant of our faith. They can be found in Article 2 of the bylaws of our Unitarian Universalist Association, which uses explicitly covenantal language. Article 2 is the living covenant of our faith, keyword being living, and therefore subject to change again and again as we change. As a liberal faith tradition, We believe that revelation is not sealed and that divine truth is in constant dialogue with all of existence, and new revelations continue to emerge. Recently, the UUA Board of Trustees appointed an Article 2 study commission charged with reviewing our principles and purposes to determine what, if any, changes to them might be relevant to our evolving context and mission as a faith. Among the proposed changes, an eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Bold. Just a couple of months ago, the Article 2 Study Commission hosted a panel centered around covenant featuring UUA President, the Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, past President, Reverend Bill Sinkford, and Reverend Meredith Garman. During this discussion, Reverend Garman pointed out that we're not necessarily unique in being a non-creedal faith. So are the Baptists and the Disciples of Christ, whose seminary I currently attend in Fort Worth. We are, in fact, more radical in being canonless. We don't have the 5 books of the Torah, the 39 books of the Tanakh, the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, the 73 books of the Catholic Bible, or the 79 books of the Orthodox Bible. Nor do we simply add all the Vedas and the Sutras and the Quran from other traditions. Ours is a boundless source. We don't have a set of texts that are definitive for us. We are at all the time discovering new texts, books, poems, and essays that speak to our hearts and souls, but also gives us a need to be defined. And what defines us are our covenants. While covenants arise from the needs of the community in the here and now, they are also crafted with an eye towards the most vulnerable and a clear vision toward the future. While our covenants explicitly name members of our congregations and faith at large, as yours did earlier today, love is the doctrine of this church, that is by no means who they are limited to. We must covenant for the interconnected web. We must covenant for our children, to covenant with love and hospitality that knows no bounds. We are brought into sacred covenant, and in some form from the time we are brought into this world. Rebecca Parker points out to us that based in its Latin etymology, covenant most simply means to come together. And one of my earliest lessons on covenant came from a song. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Get it? Amen. Blessed be. May it be so.